Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Yesterday was the 9th of September, the International Day of the Protection of Education Against Attack. Yet, ironically enough, on the same day of the protection of education from attack, my own country, Qatar, was attacked. It was attacked yesterday by Israel. The area that was attacked yesterday, which is, by the way, a residential area, had 6 schools. Now, thank God that was after school hours, so no students or faculty got affected. However, unfortunately, there were losses in lives as well as injuries. As you know, Qatar has been mediating between the Palestinians and the Israelis for years, including in the past 2 years, to stop the brutal war in Gaza. Yet, yesterday, both the mediator and the negotiators were attacked. As I was planning for this event, obviously, I was not accounting for this attack. I was planning to talk about education, the protection of education. I was planning to talk about how education can become part of peace building and can become part of the resilience of populations who live in conflict zones. I was planning to talk about Ibrahim. I'm not sure if you can show his picture here. So, Ibrahim is a Palestinian young man from Gaza. This young man lost members of his family, lost his home, lost 3 limbs, as you can see in the picture, but did not lose his beautiful smile that you can see. When I met him the first time, that was after his evacuation to Qatar to receive medical treatment. Back then, I was not the Minister of Education. Back then, I was the Minister for International Cooperation in charge of humanitarian aid for Gaza, as well as medical treatment. The first thing that Ibrahim told me when I saw him, he said, "I want a university degree. I want to pursue my education." This is not the story of Ibrahim alone. This is the story of the Palestinian people over decades of occupation and massive injustices. This is how they survived, through education. Now, to be honest, yesterday when the attack on Qatar happened, I debated with my colleagues whether I should stick to the talking points that I had prepared for this session, nice talks about education and peace and nice aspirations and dreams, or whether I should address the pain points and the realities and how we can move forward from this point to that aspired dream and aspiration. And I decided to do the latter. So I was blessed in the past 4 years to be part of major humanitarian missions that my country, Qatar, has undertaken in a number of countries, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in Gaza, and in Sudan. So in 2021, Qatar has helped more than 130,000 evacuees from Afghanistan to leave Afghanistan, mostly Afghans, but many international citizens, thousands of international citizens. Back then, there was a consensus that education is a right. Girls' education, women's education is a right. It was not negotiable. Everyone agreed. You did not see a single country taking the platform in the UN or the Security Council debating whether girls should have access to education or not. And then we had the war on Ukraine. Also, Qatar was part of the efforts to reunify Ukrainian families, and I should say also Russian families, because as you know, there are many mixed marriages. I was blessed to be part of those humanitarian efforts. Now, what I noticed in the discussions with both parties is that no one disagreed with the right of those kids. Now, in reality, obviously, there were many violations, but at least in theory, there was this agreement that children should not be victims of that war. And there was a growing discourse in the global south, as they call it, about the double standards. You know, European double standards. When a war erupts in Europe, it has a different set of standards to when it erupts in the Middle East or elsewhere. Well, that has an element of truth. Yet, I'm not a big fan of making double standards an exclusive brand of certain countries, because you know what? From experience, many countries, including the Global South, do have double standards. To give you one example, many found it difficult in the Global South to sympathize with Ukrainian kids, or to that matter, Russian kids or kids in general, right? So this is double standards. So double standards exist. And then we came to the Gaza moment, a moment that coincided with the rise of certain global powers. They call them isolationists, those who don't necessarily subscribe to international humanitarian law and international law in general and human rights in general. And suddenly, we moved from one moment of consensus around girls' education into another moment of double standards into the current moment of no standards at all. And what's the difference? That's the difference. When we talk about double standards, at least in theory, we all agree on those principles and values. Some would cheat, right? Would not necessarily apply it, or would apply it selectively. But at least in theory, we agree. But this moment of no standards at all is deeply problematic. It's a paradigm shift where we don't, in principle, even agree on those shared set of rights and laws and regulations that have governed our nations, at least since the inception of the United Nations and the Declaration of the Human Rights. And as I said, this is a paradigm shift. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas, in his brilliant book, when he talked about the structural transformation in the public sphere, he spoke in that book about rationality in the public sphere. Now, his expectation was the following, that through the modernization process, we will reach a moment of a rational public sphere. He revisited that later on in the 1980s when he noticed that traditional media and TV satellite media back then were actually controlled by transnational companies, capitalism, etc., right? I wonder what he has to say about social media and the structural changes in the public sphere nowadays, but that's beside the point. The point is the following. This moment of rationality is unfortunately gone. What we are looking at today is identity politics. Now, I know that identity politics has been part of the discussion at the national level in many countries. Yet, what we're talking about is cultural polarization and identity politics at the global level. Now, I know that many would like to kind of attribute this, the identity politics and this polarization moment and clash of ideologies, etc., to certain political shades, right? Mostly to the far right. But what I want to propose is that, unfortunately, most of us are now engaging in those ideological clashes and this polarization and identity politics. Even those of us who are more quote-unquote globalists, believe in human rights, etc., we come with our own baggages. So this is what I'm suggesting. How about we leave those identity, ideological baggages aside, and we agree on a very specific set of rights, very basic, the basic of the basic. Right to life, right to education, right to health, right to food and nutrition. No sound person would disagree with that. Well, if someone does, then we have a deeper problem. But then, if we start from this point, then maybe we can start from a shared point. Now, I'll conclude with this point. The Prime Minister of Spain yesterday, in his comment on the attack on Qatar, of course he denounced it, but then he said something that is very important. He said what we need from now on are three things. One is to reclaim rationality, reason. Now, I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing. So to reclaim reason, rationality, number one. Number two, diplomacy. So instead of solving our disagreements by force, let's go back to diplomacy, very basic. And then the third point is the rule of law. Three things: diplomacy, rationality, the rule of law. If we apply that, then this could be a good start. Thank you so much.